The scorching Atlanta summer sun beat down mercilessly on 14-year-old Jamal Washington as he walked home from his part-time job at the local car wash. His worn sneakers, held together by duct tape and hope, squeaked against the cracked sidewalk of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The $23 crumpled in his pocket represented 4 hours of back-breaking work, but it would help buy groceries for his grandmother, Nana Rose, and his little sister, Keisha. Please like this video if you're enjoying Jamal's story, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales that'll touch your heart. As Jamal turned the corner onto Peachtree Street, he noticed an elderly white man struggling outside Morrison's grocery store. The man, probably in his 70s, was trying to balance 3 heavy paper bags while fumbling with his car keys. One bag had already split, sending oranges rolling across the parking lot. "Damn it all," the old man muttered under his breath, his face flushed red from the heat and frustration. Most people walked by, pretending not to see. Jamal hesitated for a moment. He was already late, and Nana Rose would be worried. But something about the man's defeated posture reminded him of his own grandmother when she struggled with her arthritis. "Excuse me, sir," Jamal called out, jogging over. "Need some help with those bags?" The man looked up, surprised. His pale blue eyes, magnified behind wire-rimmed glasses, studied Jamal's face with curiosity rather than the suspicion the boy had grown accustomed to. That's very kind of you, son," the man replied, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "I seem to have overestimated my carrying capacity today." Jamal quickly gathered the scattered oranges, then took 2 of the heavy bags from the man's arms. "No problem at all, sir. Which car is yours?" "The old blue Buick over there." The man pointed to a well-maintained sedan a few parking spaces away. "I'm Judge—" He caught himself. "I'm Harold Bennett." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Bennett. I'm Jamal." As they walked toward the car, Harold couldn't help but notice the boy's torn shirt and the careful way he handled the groceries, as if he understood their value. "You work around here, Jamal?" "Yes, sir. At Tony's car wash down the street. Just finished my shift." Jamal carefully placed the bags in the trunk. "These are some heavy bags. You got enough food here to feed an army." Harold chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to surprise even himself. "Well, my housekeeper is visiting her family this week, so I had to do my own shopping for the first time in, probably 15 years. I may have gone a bit overboard." "Nothing wrong with being prepared," Jamal said, with a grin that lit up his entire face. "My Nana Rose always says it's better to have too much than too little, especially when it comes to food. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is. She's raising me and my little sister by herself." Jamal's voice carried a note of pride, mixed with concern. "She works double shifts at the hospital just to keep food on our table." Harold studied the boy's face, noting the maturity in his eyes that seemed beyond his years. "And here you are, working to help support your family." "That's admirable, son." Jamal shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. "Just doing what needs to be done, sir." As Harold opened his wallet to offer a tip, Jamal waved his hands. "Oh, no, sir. I can't take your money. I was just helping out." "Are you sure? You've saved this old man from a very embarrassing struggle." "I'm sure, Mr. Bennett. Sometimes people just need a hand, you know." Harold looked at this young man, this boy who had every reason to be hardened by life's circumstances, but instead chose kindness, and felt something shift in his chest. "Well, Jamal, I want you to know that your kindness today won't be forgotten." As Jamal walked away, Harold stood by his car for a long moment, watching the boy's figure disappear around the corner. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Martha, it's Harold. I need you to do some research for me. I want to know everything about the Washington family eviction case scheduled for tomorrow morning." The next morning arrived like a slap of cold reality for the Washington family. Jamal woke before dawn to the sound of his grandmother's labored coughing echoing through their small 2-bedroom apartment. The walls, once painted a cheerful yellow, now showed water stains and patches of peeling paint, that told the story of a building slowly surrendering to neglect. "Nana Rose, you okay?" Jamal called softly, not wanting to wake 6-year-old Keisha, who was curled up on the air mattress they'd set up in the living room after her bed frame broke. "I'm fine, baby," Rose Washington replied, though her voice was hoarse. At 68, she carried herself with the dignity of a woman who had weathered many storms, but lately those storms seemed to be getting stronger. "Just this old cough acting up again." Jamal padded barefoot across the cold linoleum floor to the kitchen, where he found his grandmother sitting at their small table, surrounded by a mountain of papers, bills, and legal documents. Her reading glasses were perched on her nose, and her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, despite the early hour. "You've been up all night again, haven't you?" Jamal asked, concern evident in his voice. "Couldn't sleep knowing what today brings," Rose admitted, gesturing to the eviction notice that sat prominently among the papers like a death sentence. "Mr. Hendricks wants us out by noon if the judge rules against us." Jamal sat down across from her, his young face creased with worry lines that belonged on someone much older. "Nana, tell me again what happened with the rent money." Rose sighed deeply, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up a bank statement. "Baby, you know I paid that rent on time, just like I have every month for the past 8 years. I even have the money order receipt right here." She held up a crumpled piece of paper. "But Mr. Hendricks claims he never received it, and somehow my bank shows the money order was cashed, but not by him." "That doesn't make sense," Jamal said, his jaw clenching. "Someone's lying." "I know, honey, but proving it in court, that's different. Mr. Hendricks has that fancy lawyer, Mr. Peterson, and all we have is the truth and these old receipts." The sound of little Keisha stirring in the living room interrupted their conversation. Soon she appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hair in lopsided pigtails and clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. "Why is everybody up so early?" she asked, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. Rose forced a smile, the same protective smile she'd worn through countless hardships. "Just adult stuff, sweetheart, nothing for you to worry about." But Jamal saw through his grandmother's brave facade. He knelt down to Keisha's level. "Hey, little sis. How about I make you some pancakes before you go to Mrs. Johnson's house today? With syrup." Keisha's eyes lit up. "With syrup," Jamal confirmed, though he knew they only had enough pancake mix for a few more meals. As Jamal prepared breakfast, Rose continued studying the legal papers. "The hearing is at 10 a.m. in Judge Bennett's courtroom," she murmured. "Room 4A at the Fulton County Courthouse." Jamal froze, the mixing spoon suspended in midair. "Did you say Judge Bennett?" "Yes. Why? You know that name?" I think I helped someone with that name yesterday. An older white gentleman at the grocery store." Jamal's heart began to race. "But it couldn't be the same person, right?" Rose looked up from her papers, studying her grandson's face. "Baby, there are probably lots of Bennetts in Atlanta. Don't go getting your hopes up that some chance meeting is going to save us." But even as she said it, Rose felt a tiny flutter of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. 3 hours later, the Washington family stood outside the imposing Fulton County Courthouse. The building's neoclassical columns seemed to tower over them like judgmental giants, and the marble steps felt endless as they climbed toward what could be the end of the only home Keisha had ever known. Rose wore her best dress, a navy blue outfit she'd bought for church 5 years ago and reserved for the most important occasions. Jamal had borrowed a tie from their neighbor and tried to slick down his hair with water, while Keisha held tightly to both their hands, sensing the gravity of the situation, despite not fully understanding it. "Remember," Rose whispered as they entered the building, "we tell the truth, we stay respectful, and we trust in God's plan." "Whatever that plan is," Jamal muttered under his breath. Room 4A was already crowded when they arrived. Mr. Hendricks sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man in an expensive suit who was shuffling through papers with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case like this. Hendricks himself was a large man with a permanent scowl, the type of landlord who saw tenants as nuisances rather than human beings. The Washington family took their seats at the defendant's table, which felt enormous and lonely without legal representation. Rose had tried to find a lawyer, but free legal aid was overwhelmed, and private attorneys wanted retainers they simply couldn't afford. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Bennett," the bailiff announced. Jamal's heart stopped as the judge entered the courtroom. There, wearing the black robes of justice, was the same man he had helped with groceries less than 24 hours ago. Judge Bennett's eyes swept the courtroom professionally until they landed on the Washington family. For just a moment their eyes met, and Jamal saw a flicker of recognition in the judge's face, but Harold Bennett's expression remained perfectly neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "Be seated," Judge Bennett said, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "We're here today in the matter of Hendricks versus Washington, case number HC 2023-4871. As the proceedings began, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that their family's fate now rested in the hands of a man who had seen him at his most genuine moment, helping a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. But would that moment of human connection matter in a courtroom where the law was supposedly blind? Judge Harold Bennett had presided over thousands of cases in his 30-year career, but as he looked down at the Washington family from his bench, he felt something he rarely experienced in his courtroom: personal conflict. The young man who had helped him yesterday sat beside an elderly woman who carried herself with dignity despite her circumstances, and a little girl who kept looking around the imposing courtroom with wide, curious eyes. "Mr. Peterson," Judge Bennett addressed the landlord's attorney, "please present your case." Peterson, a tall man with silver hair and a voice that oozed confidence, stood up smoothly. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward case of non-payment of rent. My client, Mr. Robert Hendricks, owns the property at 1247 Auburn Avenue, where the defendants have resided for 8 years. The rent for the month of June, in the amount of $850, was not received by the due date of June 1st, nor any time thereafter." He gestured toward a stack of documents. "We have provided the court with rental agreements, payment histories, and documentation showing that no payment was received for the month in question. Despite numerous attempts to contact the tenants and work out a payment plan, Mrs. Washington has been unresponsive to our efforts." Rose Washington shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening at the mischaracterization, but she remained silent as her grandmother had taught her to do in the presence of authority. "Furthermore," Peterson continued, "this is not an isolated incident. The defendants have been late with rent payments on 3 previous occasions in the past year, showing a pattern of financial irresponsibility." Judge Bennett made notes, his face impassive. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Washington, you are representing yourself today?" Rose stood up slowly, her legs shaky from nerves and the long morning. "Yes, Your Honor. We couldn't afford a lawyer, but I have documents that show—" "We'll get to your documents in a moment," Judge Bennett said gently. "First, I'd like you to tell the court, in your own words, what happened regarding the June rent payment." Rose took a deep breath, gathering her composure. "Your Honor, I paid my rent on time, just like I have every month for 8 years. I purchased a money order from the Checkmart on Memorial Drive for $850 on May 30th, and I hand-delivered it to Mr. Hendricks' office on May 31st. You have proof of this money order?" "Yes, sir." Rose fumbled through her papers with trembling hands until Jamal gently took them from her and found the receipt. "Here's the receipt showing I purchased it, and here's the stub showing it was cashed on June 3rd. Judge Bennett examined the documents carefully. "Mr. Peterson, has your client seen these documents?" Peterson barely glanced at the papers. "Your Honor, anyone can create false receipts. What matters is that my client never received payment, and Mrs. Washington cannot produce any evidence that he did." "Actually," Rose said, her voice growing stronger, "I can. She pulled out a small appointment book. I write down every rent payment, every bill, every important thing in this book. Has for 20 years. On May 31st, I wrote, "Rent paid to Mr. H. Money order, pump 4471892, and I wrote the time, 2:15 p.m. Judge Bennett studied the worn notebook, noting the consistent handwriting and the years of meticulous entries. "Mrs. Washington, you mentioned you hand-delivered this payment. Did anyone witness this?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Hendricks's secretary, Miss Patricia, was there. She always gives me a receipt." Rose's face fell. "But this time she said she'd mail it to me later because their receipt book was being updated. I trusted her because I'd been paying rent there for 8 years without any problems." From across the courtroom, Mr. Hendricks whispered something urgently to his lawyer. Peterson nodded and stood up again. "Your Honor, my client's former secretary, Patricia Mills, is no longer with the company. She left rather suddenly in mid-June, and we have reason to believe there may have been some irregularities with her handling of certain transactions." Judge Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. This was new information that hadn't been in the initial filing. "Mr. Peterson, are you suggesting that this secretary may have intercepted rental payments?" "We're not suggesting anything concrete, Your Honor. We simply cannot account for her handling of transactions during her final weeks of employment." The courtroom fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair, processing this revelation. He looked at the Washington family, at Rose's hopeful face, at Jamal's clenched jaw, at little Keisha, who was coloring quietly in a notebook. "Mrs. Washington," Judge Bennett said carefully, "can you describe this secretary, Patricia Mills?" "Oh, yes, sir. She's a young black woman, maybe mid-20s, always wore her hair in braids. Real friendly, always asked about my grandchildren. She'd been working there maybe 2 years. Judge Bennett made more notes. "And, Mr. Hendricks, you're telling this court that this same employee left suddenly, and you suspect financial irregularities. Yet you proceeded with this eviction without investigating whether she might have stolen rent payments from your tenants?" Hendricks stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that's speculation. The bottom line is—" "Mr. Hendricks," Judge Bennett's voice carried a warning, "you will speak only through your attorney, unless I direct otherwise." Peterson placed a restraining hand on his client's arm. "Your Honor, while these questions about our former employee are interesting, they don't change the fundamental facts. No rent payment was received by my client, and therefore—" "Actually, Mr. Peterson," Judge Bennett interrupted, "if your client's employee was embezzling rental payments, that changes everything about this case." Judge Bennett turned his attention back to Rose. "Mrs. Washington, in 8 years of tenancy, have you ever been formally served with eviction notices before?" "No, sir. Never. Those times Mr. Peterson mentioned when we were late, Mr. Hendricks always worked with us. When my hours got cut at the hospital, he let me pay partial rent and catch up the next month. When Jamal here got sick with pneumonia and I missed work, he gave me extra time. We've always worked things out. And this time—" Rose's voice grew bitter. "This time he wouldn't even talk to me, just served me with papers and told me to take it up with the court." Judge Bennett looked at Hendricks, who was whispering furiously to his attorney. Something about this case wasn't sitting right. In his years on the bench, he'd developed an instinct for truth, and Rose Washington's story had the ring of authenticity that couldn't be manufactured. "I'm going to call a 15-minute recess," Judge Bennett announced. "When we return, I want to see all financial records related to Patricia Mills' employment, including any investigation into missing funds." As the courtroom emptied for recess, Jamal caught his grandmother's arm. "Nana, did you see how the judge was looking at that paperwork? And did you notice he didn't seem surprised about Miss Patricia?" Rose nodded slowly. "That man's been thinking about this case before we even walked in here, baby. Question is, what's he been thinking?" Neither of them noticed Judge Bennett watching them through his chamber window, his mind wrestling with the intersection of justice and the memory of a young man's kindness on a sweltering Atlanta afternoon. Judge Harold Bennett sat alone in his chambers during the recess, staring at a framed photograph on his desk, a picture of himself with his late wife Martha, taken at their 40th wedding anniversary. Martha had always been his moral compass, the voice that reminded him that behind every case file was a human story worth considering. "What would you do, sweetheart?" he whispered to the photograph, then turned his attention to the file his clerk had just brought him. The information was damning. Patricia Mills had indeed been terminated after an internal audit revealed discrepancies in rental collection accounts. 3 other tenants had come forward, claiming they'd paid rent that Hendricks insisted he'd never received. The company had quietly settled with those tenants rather than face potential fraud charges, but they had proceeded with the Washington eviction anyway. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." His court clerk, Janet, entered with additional documents. "Judge Bennett, I thought you should see this. It's Patricia Mills's personnel file and the internal investigation report that Mr. Peterson somehow forgot to include in discovery." Harold's jaw tightened as he read through the report. Patricia Mills had been stealing rental payments by intercepting money orders, depositing them into a personal account, and then claiming tenants had never paid. The scheme had netted her nearly $15,000 over 6 months. "Janet, why wasn't this information provided to the court initially?" According to the timestamp, Mr. Peterson only requested these files from his client this morning after Mrs. Washington mentioned Patricia by name. Judge Bennett leaned back in his chair, the weight of judicial responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He thought about Jamal's words from the day before. Sometimes people just need a hand, you know. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Mr. Peterson looked considerably less confident, while Mr. Hendricks appeared to be sweating despite the air conditioning. "Mr. Peterson," Judge Bennett began, "I've reviewed the additional documentation regarding Patricia Mills. Would you care to explain why this information wasn't included in your original filing?" Peterson stood up slowly, his earlier swagger completely absent. "Your Honor, my client was unaware of the potential connection between Ms. Mills's activities and this particular case." "I see. And the internal investigation that concluded 6 weeks ago, your client was unaware of that as well." "Your Honor, there were multiple cases and—" Judge Bennett held up his hand. "Mr. Peterson, I'm going to stop you there. Mrs. Washington, would you please stand?" Rose Washington rose on unsteady legs, Jamal immediately standing to support her elbow. "Mrs. Washington, based on the evidence presented to this court, including documentation that was conveniently omitted from initial filings, it is clear that you did indeed pay your rent on time, as you have faithfully done for 8 years. The money order you purchased was cashed, but not by your landlord. It was stolen by his employee as part of a systematic fraud scheme." Rose's hand flew to her heart. "Your Honor, does that mean—" "It means, Mrs. Washington, that this eviction petition is denied. Furthermore, Mr. Hendricks, you and your company are hereby ordered to reimburse Mrs. Washington for all court costs and any expenses incurred related to this frivolous filing." The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Judge Bennett wasn't finished. "Additionally, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential fraud and harassment charges. It appears your company has engaged in a pattern of proceeding with evictions against victims of your employees' theft, rather than taking responsibility for your failure to properly oversee rental collections." Mr. Hendricks jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We're the victims here too." "Mr. Hendricks," Judge Bennett's voice thundered through the courtroom, "you are the victim of employee theft, but Mrs. Washington and her family are the victims of your company's callous decision to destroy their lives, rather than acknowledge your security failures. The fact that you settled similar cases quietly while pursuing this family suggests a deliberate pattern of targeting those least able to defend themselves. Rose Washington began to cry, but these were tears of relief rather than despair. Jamal put his arm around her shoulders while little Keisha looked up with confusion at the adult drama surrounding her. "Mrs. Washington," Judge Bennett continued, his voice gentler now, "I want to personally apologize that our justice system put you and your family through this ordeal. Your dignity and honesty in the face of this manufactured crisis is a testament to your character." As the Washington family gathered their papers, Judge Bennett made one final announcement. "Court is adjourned." But as the family headed toward the exit, Judge Bennett called out, "Young man, could I speak with you for a moment?" Jamal approached the bench nervously. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Bennett leaned forward, lowering his voice so only Jamal could hear. "Yesterday, when you helped an old man with his groceries, you had no idea who he was or what impact that kindness might have, did you?" Jamal's eyes widened. "No, sir, it was the right thing to do." "Exactly. And today, justice was served not because of who you helped, but because truth has a way of revealing itself when good people refuse to give up." Judge Bennett paused. "Your grandmother raised a fine young man. Never lose that instinct to help others." "Thank you, sir. And thank you for listening to us today." Judge Bennett watched as Jamal rejoined his family, and Rose Washington turned back to mouth "thank you" one more time before they disappeared through the courtroom doors. Later that evening, Harold Bennett sat in his study at home, sipping tea and reflecting on the day's events. His phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. "Hello? Judge Bennett? This is Rose Washington. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I wanted to call and thank you proper-like for what you did today. Mrs. Washington, I simply applied the law fairly. That's what judges are supposed to do." "Maybe so, but we both know there are ways to apply the law that might not have worked out so well for us. You chose to dig deeper, to ask the right questions. You chose to see us as human beings." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Washington, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sir." "That grandson of yours, where does he get that generous spirit from?" Rose's laugh was warm and rich through the phone line. "Oh, that's easy, Your Honor. When you don't have much, you learn that the only wealth that matters is the kindness you give away. The more you share it, the richer you become." After they hung up, Judge Bennett sat in his study long into the night, thinking about justice, kindness, and the unexpected ways that doing the right thing can ripple through the world. 3 months later, Jamal Washington walked across the stage at his high school graduation ceremony. In the audience, Nana Rose wiped away tears of pride, while little Keisha clapped enthusiastically from her seat. They were still living in the same apartment on Auburn Avenue, but now it felt like home again, rather than a place they were desperately trying to keep. The eviction case had made local news, leading to a broader investigation of fraudulent rental practices in the city. Patricia Mills was serving 18 months in prison, and the Hendricks Rental Company had been forced to implement new oversight procedures and pay substantial fines. But for Jamal, the most important outcome was simpler. His family was safe, and he'd learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest consequences. As he accepted his diploma, Jamal spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Judge Harold Bennett sat in the back row, wearing a simple gray suit instead of his judicial robes, applauding along with everyone else. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Judge Bennett approached the Washington family. "Congratulations, Jamal," he said, extending his hand. "I heard you received a full scholarship to Georgia Tech." "Yes, sir. Going to study engineering." "That's wonderful. You know, they're always looking for good people in the public defender's office, too, if you ever decide law interests you." Rose Washington stepped forward. "Judge Bennett, what brings you here today?" Harold smiled, looking slightly embarrassed. "Well, Mrs. Washington, I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day on the phone, about kindness being the only wealth that matters. I realized I'd been so focused on the law that I'd forgotten about the people behind it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I wanted to see this young man graduate because he reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to make sure justice serves everyone, not just those who can afford it. As the Washington family headed home that evening, their hearts full of hope and possibility, none of them could have imagined that a simple act of helping a stranger carry groceries would lead to this moment. But that's the beautiful thing about kindness. You never know how far it will travel or whose life it might change. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that small acts of kindness can change everything. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the good in humanity, and leave a comment telling us about a time when kindness made a difference in your life. Until next time, remember, we all have the power to be someone's blessing.